move into the 1 Samuel study next week, we're going to do that differently. We're going to do a couple of chapters a night. We're not going to focus on everything. We're going to look at everything individually before we get here, and then it's going to be more like a book club kind of thing. You should already have an idea of what stuck out to you and what was interesting to you and what do you have specific questions about. And we're going to pick a bullet point or two, however it works out from each chapter, and focus specifically on that for our discussion here. So this inductive Bible study program that myself and some of the other guys went to a couple weeks ago is really good at showing normal everyday people how, hey, you can do your own Bible study, by the way, and you can actually learn enough just without any other resources than the Bible to actually give messages of your own to people that you run into, your friends, your family, people who are maybe dealing with something that you ran across in Scripture. So here's what you're going to need to know from this thing. It's like, say, next Wednesday, we're going to look at 1 Samuel chapters 1 and 2. So it'll be way less confusing than this was.
I put mine away already.
So 1 Samuel 1 and 2. So look at this outlining a Bible passage page here. Look at A, the simple form of outlining. That's all you need to know here. Can be used for any book of the Bible. You simply go through the text, look for the ideas being presented, finding where each thought begins and ends. So you're going to read chapters 1 and 2 several times, get accustomed to it, get used to it, read it enough times that you could actually just kind of tell me in general what it says. And then you're going to go through and just outline that. Okay, from verses 1 through 5, this is kind of what it's talking about. And then it shifts and it talks about something else from verse 6 through whatever. So you just a simple outline of the topics being talked about. Okay, so you're going to do that, and then you're going to look at this chart over here on page 2. Observation, interpretation, application. This is the method of Bible study I use in presenting the studies that I give here. Observation. Look at each little section. Who are the people listed? What is the situation? What are they talking about? Do we know when it happened? Do we know where it happened? Do they use how? Mike and I were just talking about this. We all use why generally there. But how is fine. Now, ask questions. What can you observe? Just what are the facts? Just the facts, ma'am. What are the facts? This is a dragnet situation. Although they never actually said that, which is very interesting, to me anyway. So ask those questions. Make sure you can retell the event. See what you can come up with just factually. Well, this was so-and-so's dad. Or this was so-and-so's cousin. It said that this king reigned for X amount of years. Whatever. Just facts that might mean something, they might not. Then interpretation. There's a whole list of tools there for you to use. Questions for you to ask yourself. Well, is that important? Why is it important? Why would it be important? Why might it be important? And so you figure that out. And then application. Is there anything from what I just observed and interpreted what its meaning was that I can apply to my life now? Is it instructing me to do something? Is it telling me not to do something or to do something or whatever? Okay? Everything about our Bible studies has to be application based. What does it mean and what does it mean to me? How is my life supposed to react to that information? So if you guys will do that, I gave you a blank page there on the end. I made a bunch of extra copies of that you will need, because we're going to do this all the way through the book. At least all the way through 1 Samuel, and then we'll reevaluate how we think it's going. So you're going to need multiples of that chart because you're going to need it for every chapter going forward. But it seems like a lot of work, but you got a week. You got a week. Spend a couple of days just reading it. Just read the first 2 chapters. Get real comfortable with it until, again, you're so used to it you can kind of retell it. Then start diving into tearing it apart and trying to see what it says. And any questions at all that you have, shoot them to me, and I'll do everything I can to help. But leave here with this and with some extras of this so you can make your notes. And we will convene next Wednesday to do a 2-chapter in 45-minute study of 1 Samuel. But again, see, we're not going to look at everything.
Amen.
Okay? That's why I want you doing this, because I want you to study the whole book. We're not going to talk about everything here, but that doesn't mean it's not all worth studying. And so I want you to understand that you can do the rest of the study on your own, and everything's going to be fine. We're going to get through this. All right? Any questions now?
Is everybody going to have to turn in their sheets?
Stunned to silence. No, you don't have to turn in anything. The sheets are...
Ron was asking that in his head.
Yeah.
He sent that to me.
The sheets are for your notes to have when you bring. So if one of the topics we pick out to focus on, you have some thoughts about that, you can share those. You got them.
Amen.
Okay.
And then when you pick up on something we didn't pick up on, you can share that too.
We're going to allow that.
I don't know. You were doing the first book, so I was going to see how you went with it.
That seems scary. I'm doing the first book?
You said we were splitting it, so I assumed you were starting.
Oh, Mike, never assume. Never assume.
And interestingly enough, in an unprogrammed fashion, I was actually going to introduce part of this concept in how I do this extra biblical research and stuff for this.
It was programmed, just not by us.
Exactly. So we're actually going to do a little bit of application of that same thing. So tonight, being part 9, we're going to start the Tower of Babel. Now we're going to split the Tower of Babel into 2 parts, okay? Because it became evident about noon today that there was no way, unless the Lord just extends the time between now and 30, that we are going to pull off of this. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about kind of the nuts and bolts of the Tower of Babel, how it was built, where it was built, stuff like that, the physicality of it. And then next time we're going to talk about the anthropological construct of that. She really enjoyed that.
She did.
I tripped on
Made
that.
her very happy.
So the anthropological construct, which is basically how it affected the people after they were dispersed and stuff like that, and then the linguistic issues with all of the different words and all that stuff, different languages and everything. So today we're going to start off. We're going to be talking about Genesis 11, 1 through 9. That's our topic verses here. So verse 1 here. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. We're all pretty familiar with this story, right?
Yep.
Okay, there we go. So, what do we know from the Bible text, and what can we try to look for, and the 5 W's we're going to use? So first things first, what I do is I go through and I break down verse by verse, looking for, in the context of this extra biblical study, what is there in the verses that I can find physical evidence for in the real world? Okay, things like that. And then what verses point to things that I can find, or maybe people groups and stuff like that. So, first things first, everybody spoke a single language. That's in verse 1. Number 2, the people dwelt in the land of Shinar, from verse 2. They knew how to make bricks, and they had natural asphalt to use for mortar. Okay? And then the people sought to build a city and a tower. And the people sought to glorify themselves and not God. Interestingly here, the word make a name for themselves, the word there for name, is actually basically shame. Means reputation, fame, and glory. So they were seeking their own fame and glory. The single language was confused or confounded so that the people cannot understand each other. That comes from verse 7 and verse 9b. I use this thing when there's too many, when the verse is too long. A lot of times it'll have a semicolon in it, stuff like that. It's a natural break in it. Oftentimes it's also can be used to point to different directions. So B would be the second part of that verse, okay, versus an A or a C or something like that. 7, they stopped building the city and possibly left the tower unfinished. They ceased building the city. And verse number 8 here, the people were scattered from the land of Shinar and caused to spread all across the earth. Verse 8a and 9c there. And then 9 point, the place became known as Babel. So therefore the name is called Babel, verse 9a. So that's how we do that. Now the first details we want to figure out here, kind of like that system, I use who, where, when, what, and why. So, not all the 5 W's have to be present in what we're doing here, but they are handy to be sure, and we have the correct context for the verses that we're working on. This allows us to establish the correct context for the understanding of the verses, especially important in Old Testament stuff, that you know the environment with which you're working in. And then the 5 W's almost always interact with each other as well. So often the who is related to where or when and things like that. So they often intermingle. Now, let's talk about who first. Basically, all the people that had descended from Noah's family after they stepped off the ark, correct?
Yeah.
So, or at least a very large portion of them that had settled in the east. There's a little bit of an argument because there was the 3 sons as to whether or not all the sons had sent all their progeny this direction into Shinar. The text is pretty specific that it is a bare minimum the bulk of the population.
Right.
Okay, it's pretty much everybody was there. That's that. Now, if we look at Genesis 10, we find one named directly associated with Babel, and another associated based on context. First one being Nimrod, from Genesis 10, 8 through 10. Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, and in the land of Shinar.
We're still in Shinar.
So we have a direct reference to an individual that was in at least leadership, if not the king, in the land of Shinar. Okay? So that's a reference to where we're at. The second name that's listed Nimrod, and we might as well do this. Nimrod is the great-grandson of Noah and is credited with either starting the city of Babel or being its leader and ordering the building of the tower. Okay? So this is the guy that said, hey, let's build the tower. Now, another name is Peleg. Okay, that's from Genesis 10:25. To Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Now, Peleg is the great-great-great-great-grandson of Noah, and he is related to the when question. Okay? And God. You never want to leave God out of it. Okay? The who section pretty much always has to include at least one aspect of the triunal personage. Would you agree with that?
Most of the time, yes.
Yeah. Of God. So you got the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. They're in there somewhere, if not all of them. Okay? So always be sure you're looking for that.
Or here's the thing: if they're not referenced, that's important too. That's an important who. The presence or lack of presence of God in a situation.
Judges here, we saw some
Especially pointing Judges
we're not
where
really involved in him at all.
where there's
That's
distinctly
part of the problem.
when they're distinctly not there. Yeah, that's a very good point. So let's look at where. We're told in Genesis 11:2b, they journeyed from the east and they found a plain in the land of Shinar. They journeyed east here by context is in reference to the resting place of the ark and the valley south and south to the east of the mountains of Ararat. Okay, so I made you a little map here. I think I can put. Let me see my. No, you can't because.
Well, that's from the east. So it doesn't mean they started at Ararat and moved.
Yeah, so the mountains of Ararat are right here. Okay, a relatively inhospitable place on an average basis because it's a mountain range. So it's basically believed, and archaeology supports, that when they got out of the ark, they moved south here into this valley. And this right here is kind of the region we're talking about, this being Babylon right here. And actually,
Which again matches up because some of the earliest records we have of any civilization are literally right there.
yeah. So Shinar actually means the country of two rivers. And that's a direct reference to the Euphrates and the Tigris. Okay. And then, sorry, it's hard to point and move buttons at the same time. In this case, it is believed to be the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates. Shinar is also the ancient name used for Babylon, which is also known as Babel. Okay? So that's an important point here. So when it says Babylon on the map, we know that to mean Babel. Now, the site of Babylon is about 50 miles south of modern-day Baghdad, which is built on the Tigris River. And the modern-day city of Hilla, Iraq, is actually adjacent to Babel. And the people that built the houses in Hilla actually went to Babel and took the bricks and took them back home next door and built their houses with the bricks of Babel. Okay?
That's very interesting.
When I read that, I thought to myself, man, that seems like a bad plan.
As long as you're not stacking too high, you know.
Yeah. You're not trying to go too, not building a 5-story house. Yeah. It's good for short houses. So we'll talk about more about this location later on. But now we want to talk about when. So we got the who, the where, now the when. So we know that it could not have been too long after the flood, since the population had not grown to the extent that they had to have more land than this area provided to support the population. Okay? Now, i.e., only so many people can live in Middle Tennessee.
True.
Okay?
We're finding that out rapidly.
Yes, we are, aren't we?
We're
So,
there. If you're in California. Just kidding. I got a call from a great guy in California this week. They're moving out. Can't wait to meet you.
We've got their own section over there now. So eventually a large enough group would be forced to find other land, okay? Kind of like the discussion between Abraham and was it Lot, where they separated?
Yeah.
Where they had too many things in one spot,
Right.
and they had to separate, okay? Same kind of concept. I have to be careful pulling names out of thin air. So. We also know that it could not have been too close to the time of the flood, since there had to be a large enough population to take on the construction project to build the tower. Okay, you can't build a tower with 10 people. Okay, not going to work. So, Peleg is a reasonable reference point as to this when question. Okay, Peleg actually means division. So when it says the division, because the division occurred in his time, that's what it's talking about. Okay, for this day when the earth was divided. Now, come on. Since we know that the physical division of the earth occurred during the flood as the continents were rearranged, okay, because there is some argument, especially by young Earth supporters, okay, that the division that they're talking about when they talk about Peleg would be the division of Pangea, that kind of conglomerate continent that gets divided up into, and now we have the continents that we have now. Their argument is that that is what is happening during Peleg's lifetime. However, that would be a cataclysmic event that would have been noticed in more than Peleg was around during the division. Okay, because all kinds of things went wrong. Kind of like all kinds of things that go wrong in the flood. Yeah, in order for that to be true, because we know Peleg wasn't born on the ark.
Right.
So we know he's after the fact. So they're saying that Pangea split up after the flood, which is a rather irrational argument, because we have this perfectly nice period of time called the flood in which all this chaos can ensue, and does.
And we have the context of the people being divided. Let's just let that be.
Yeah, let's just let it be. Okay.
If you just go down a few verses, it tells you it's about 100 years from the time of the flood till it was formed.
If you go down. So chapter 10 refers to the division of the land amongst family lines according to the language too. So Genesis 10:5, 20, and 31 all refers to a division of the groupings based on family lines and the language that they speak into their various nations. Okay, which actually might answer your question you talked about earlier.
Makes sense.
a little more on the wind. Thus, we can associate the division spoke of in these verses with Peleg, since the Bible is very specific that the earth was divided during his time. Now, when was Peleg born? This is well defined later in Genesis verses 10 through 16. Peleg was born 101 years after the flood. Now, he lived a total of 239 years. He had a son when he was 30, and then he lived an additional 209 years. So we add those together for 239 years. That's Genesis 11:18 through 19. Now, some argue on this information alone that the division that resulted from the Tower of Babel occurred as Peleg was born, effectively. Thus, that's why he was named Peleg. Okay? I don't know why they insist on this argument, though, because there's plenty of evidence throughout the Old Testament where people's names come to truth, to mean things, much later on in their life. You know, they're already around for 100 years before their name actually goes, oh, looky there. Okay? So we already have plenty of evidence for that. I don't think it's a relatively reasonable argument to say that the division had to occur at 101 years because Peleg was born on that day. Mm-hmm. All right. Now, yeah, okay. I already said all that. Thus, it is only reasonable to narrow the time window to the division to a period of 101 to 340 years after the flood. Okay. We would take into account that the division occurred some time at bare minimum in his lifetime. Okay? Now, the Usher Chronology, which that is spelled wrong there. There's not enough S's. He has 2 S's in his name. I apologize for that. This is approximately 2247 to 2008 BC. Okay? For those that are using their Google Calendar to back up. Now, the Jewish historian Josephus, we talked about Josephus quite a bit. He talked about Peleg. Now this is an interesting reason. He was called Peleg because he was born at the dispersion of the nations to their several countries. For Peleg among the Hebrews signifies division. Okay. I'm not sure in this case if he's making that same argument as, because he's a historian quite a bit later, that he's saying that the division occurred early on because of that natural argument of, hey, his name is division and division occurred.
He's just recording what he heard. So at the very least, I would say, because everything was passed down orally to that point anyway.
Yeah.
So that's either what happened or it became that as the story got told.
Basic concept of what
I think it's also an interesting point that the minute the languages are changed, everybody doesn't just go, okay, well, you line up over here, you're that language. There's a process that would happen as these groups sort of became separated and organized and then went off in their separate ways. We don't get a specific time frame in Genesis as far as like how long it took the peoples once separated to kind of go. So the division seems like it could also be sort of an ongoing process over a period of time.
Well, we know that what we can define from what we know, if we let the word speak for itself, that the confusion occurred all at once.
Yeah.
Okay, so all the languages generated over time. How long it took them to separate out.
Form separate nations.
But we also know that the Lord encouraged them greatly. So I'm sure it was fairly quick in the overall concept.
But like in the way he wrote it there, it sounds like that could have been sort of an ongoing process.
Could have been. Yo.
Okay, I have an odd question for y'all. Of course, this is me.
Okay.
But is there a medical reason? Can medical science explain the languages being confused? I.e.,
no.
Massive stroke or something like that?
No, because everybody in the population would have to have a stroke,
Yeah.
which would not lend to good health later on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say modern medicine could not define a situation where that would occur. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay. Now,
If you think God can make every part of the body, you certainly can think He can just make you speak differently.
Yeah, exactly. And we know that tongues is a thing that happens, right? So there's no particular reason why he can't just, switch your vocabularies around.
The biggest one-time gifting in history.
Bam!
Was he up there coming up with languages? He's like, okay, what are these guys
And it's
gonna sound
permanent,
like?
you know?
They're going to write backwards and sideways. Sorry.
I've seen some interesting cartoons about that concept.
Again, that's the artistry of God, though.
Yeah.
Right?
Because they're so different. I mean, there's languages that are so vastly
Absolutely.
separated.
And each language will be carefully crafted. And we're not even talking about language today. So.
Hush now.
Now, with the what. So the what is pretty clear from the text. It's the city and the Tower of Babel, right? So we don't even need to talk about that much more. The why. So the why can be made fairly complicated in that you can delve into different reasons from several different points of view. Sometimes it's best settled by some basic questions and almost always relates to the motivations of the individuals in the who section. So look at the who and figure out specifically what the who are accomplishing or being held from or something like that. And that'll usually give you your why answers, or at least a good direction in that focus. So consider the form of why did blank do what they did, or what were they trying to accomplish. Okay? Now, the people and Nimrod and possibly Peleg, right? So according to Genesis 11:4b, they sought to stake a claim upon the land and glorify themselves above the Lord. There's our why. Okay? Now, the Lord God acted to confuse the population and thus reduce their ability to defy and rebel against him. Okay?
Yep.
That's his why. So, as well as to force human beings to go forth and multiply across the face of the earth. So I relate this to whenever I read this section, I always tie it to the early church, because they kind of gathered and they didn't go out and share the good news across the face of the earth until God had to break them up. It's almost exactly the same concept. They were building their stuff right there. They were doing all their things, and then the Lord said, "No, here we go." Okay, and had to spread them out. So,
If you don't do Acts 1:8, it leads to Acts 8:1.
and you could argue that those people at least spoke a different language because they were speaking Christ.
Bam.
Boom. Now,
I just think it's interesting that they after God said go forth and multiply, they said, hey, let's build this tower so we don't disperse.
yeah. So we don't do
We
that.
want to stay right here.
And there's actually, and the secret to that's actually probably in Nimrod himself, and we're actually going to talk about that in a little bit.
But now, what I find interesting about it is nothing will be withheld from them if we allow this.
That is an interesting turn of phrase.
So God broke the language up because He wanted them to serve Him and not become, I don't know exactly how to put this, but like gods of their own making or whatever.
So here's the thing: they returned to
They were gonna.
the condition that they were in prior to the flood.
Yes.
Okay, they effectively went right back into rebellion. So, as I said here, and to bring glory to His name by being love and grace towards His children, and not simply smashing them all like boats. Okay, it would have been perfectly justifiable for Him to say, "That's it, we're done."
It's a nice
Start
tower. It'd be a shame if it fell on most of you.
Yeah.
Well, but I think
There's
his
a lot of
point
ways
is
this would have
interesting in
gone.
that the way it's phrased, it's like, what did he think that they were? I mean, obviously they were rebelling, but it's phrased like, what did he think they were going to do if they did continue on? I mean, obviously they were leaving his, what he wanted them to do.
And
So it all working together toward this sin. It sounds like he was worried about them.
we'll talk about that more in a bit.
somehow.
So there is a good outline for that.
I think
pretty sure.
I have
what
a
he
good
was
feeling.
trying to stop them from doing.
So now we
So
can.
the Greek kind of makes it sound more like will be restrained, which they have imagined to do, is closer to what the Greek says.
So they were going to do all manner of awful things, kind of.
They
Well,
were
what
raising
they imagined
themselves
versus
up
what they were
as
doing,
God,
yeah.
effectively.
Yeah.
What
You
they
can
thought
make
they
the
could do versus
argument
what they
that
were doing.
their notion was that, like Satan did, they said we can be like God
Yeah.
if we do this. And Josephus actually talks quite a bit about Nimrod and the motivations to do this tower. So we'll get to that. So now, everybody spoke a single language. Does it make sense that the whole earth spoke one language?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, pretty easy. 100 to 300 years after the flood, how many people survived the flood? Eight people, okay. Genesis 7:7, Noah's sons, wives, we all went over that. Now, it is reasonable to assume that these 8 people spoke the same language, without the possibility of maybe Noah's wife was a little cantankerous. I don't know.
I would be if I were her.
I often think my wife speaks a different language than me, so I'm not sure. Anyways, so of course they live in the same region and we're the same family. Since all of mankind are descendants of Noah,
I'm not saying a word. I'm just sitting here.
and it has been about 100 to 300 years since they left. Whoa.
Hey. Oh.
Since they left the boat, and it'd be perfectly logical that they all spoke one language at that point. Especially reasonable when you consider that they did not have any immigration resources that would bring alternative languages into the group. Okay, so a lot of people discuss this argument based on our current environment. They didn't have our current environment.
Right.
Okay, so you can't say, oh, well, this group of people existed north of Mexico for 300 years, and the Mexicans constantly came up and talked to them, and they started incorporating Mexican words in their language. They didn't have that. Okay, it wasn't the problem.
There really wasn't another language.
Exactly.
They were all the Noahites.
Unless the whales started communicating with them directly, they were not getting outside input. So, is it viable to have enough people 100 to 300 years after the flood? I told you we'd do the math on this. So, given that we start with 8 people, Noah and his wife, then the 3 boys and their wives, Genesis 10 does reveal that Noah did not have more sons after the flood. Okay, so we're actually not going to include them in our population increase numbers, okay, because they probably didn't increase too often. So the basic population growth rate calculator that I built for you is this, okay. You can read all that stuff on the bottom about irrational and transcendental numbers if you want, but I didn't figure I'd force you to do that. So here's the way that works. If you have an initial population, just for argument's sake, of 2 people, okay, you have a growth rate of the population of 10% per year. So what that means is based on the number of people born minus the number of people who died, that's how much the population increases each year by 10%. Okay. Now, we know that not very many people died of probably old age in this time period. So when Peleg is born, the great grandson, okay, of Noah, who Noah actually lived longer than his great grandson, okay, because Noah lived to like 900 years, and Peleg died before Noah did. So, but he lived to 239 years. Okay, so we're talking 100 to 300 years. I didn't include much of a notion of death. Okay, I'm sure there was some death, but I'm also sure that it was quite possible that they had quite a bit of birth here and there too. Okay, I don't know how cold the winters were. So, did you ever think it was interesting that there were no babies born on the ark? Okay, anyways.
No.
The estimated population, there weren't big walls. That's the only way I could think of it. Yeah, they didn't have a private room. So, if you did it for 100 years with 2 people at 10% growth, you get 44,053 people. Okay? It's an exponential growth system using a natural log. If you have 4 people, same time period, you end up with 88,106 people. Okay? If you have 6 people, you end up with 132,159 people. Okay? Now, if you go out to 200 years, so I would consider that the minimum number of available people in the population at that point in the Valley of Shinar. Okay? About 132,000 people. If you add that to 200 years, and we even decrease the rate of growth to 7% there, you get 7 million people. Okay? Now, were there 7 million people in the Valley of Shinar? Probably not. Okay? So our numbers probably overshooting a bit there, but it's due to factors that we don't have additional information for. But just to give you an idea, at 5% growth rate for 300 years, you could have 19 million people. So there is more than enough opportunity to have plenty of people in the land of Shinar building the city of Babel and the tower. Okay? It is not a population problem.
Because you will hear skeptics say that that's not possible.
Correct.
That it happened too close to the flood. There weren't enough people to even
Okay. From a technological standpoint, though, as far as, I mean, there was no internet, there was no Netflix, no Xbox, there was not much else to
Right.
do but have families.
And whatever.
And you needed to have families to
And
do
hunts and
Yeah,
stuff.
live
Yeah.
Farm and
all the stuff you needed.
They were also told to have families,
Yeah.
so that helped quite
Straight
a bit.
from
So,
God.
yeah. The,
Who they seem to forget.
anyways,
300 years later.
I consider those to be relatively conservative in the construct, but that's how it goes. So,
So why do you think there wasn't 7 million? There probably was 7 million.
because there's probably an additional death rate that we're not calculating for. I just don't have enough information to give us
the
that.
land was pretty rough at that
It was pretty rough. So,
Infant mortality.
but
You were there? Well, we're talking about post-flood. I mean, you were here a month ago, right?
we know it's not a pleasant environment.
It's still pretty tumultuous.
But we also know that the Lord's involved in the multiplication
Right, he
and the
wants them to
multiplying.
be
So he wants them to be successful in what they're doing. But he probably also capped it off at some point. But he doesn't tell us that information. So that's just the best notion I have. That's why.
Somehow they were able to build a city, so.
Exactly. They had enough people to do that. So the people dwelt in the land of Shinar, from verse 2 there. We already addressed this issue with the where, so we're going to point 3. They knew how to make bricks, and they had natural asphalt to use for mortar. Now, for this point, we're going to go to archaeology of the region. Okay, so the technology exists to make bricks, and were they used for this purpose? So, this is a wonderful image of a place called the Great Ziggurat of Ur, okay, which is a Sumerian temple located a little further southeast, and dates approximately 2100 BC or so. Okay, right about the same time period. Now, the original one is on top as they kind of excavated the area. It was since rebuilt down on the bottom there. The bottom level, the first terrace there, consists of 720,000 baked bricks. Okay. So this was not a small project, but the technology obviously existed. They knew how to make bricks. Each one of these bricks was pretty good size, weighed about 33 pounds. So this was, not a light project.
This was right around the time that, as far as we can tell, ballpark Babel was supposed to be happening, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right around that time period. This is something
building this.
representative of the
they were
idea
doing, yeah.
that we're dating kind of right around that time period. Okay. Now, how about the access to asphalt? All right, asphalt is a naturally occurring material that bubbles up out of the ground. It's also known as tar. What do they call it? Is it bitumen? Bitumen. Okay, which is actually more of a scientific name for it. But it's this nasty black sticky stuff that bubbles up out of the earth and produces pools on the surface. It comes into a couple different ways. These are actually in Trinidad. So the bottom one, basically the asphalt mixes with the water, and then it gets pushed towards the edge, and it makes these tarry film stuff on the edge of the water. The top one is just a full-on tar pit like they have in La Brea in California, where the
Bubbling
stuff falls in and then it gets sealed, gone forever. So archaeologists have actually tracked many of the ancient structures in the Middle East region. They contain bitumen from seepage sites along the Euphrates River in southern Iraq. Okay, so we know that those sites don't really exist anymore because it's a limited thing. It's an oil product, a petroleum product. It's not going to last forever technically. It runs away, especially when you're building something with 720,000 bricks that you got a mortar. Okay, and that's just for level 1.
of that little building.
Of the little building. So now the people sought to build a city and a tower. I did not space that one, so you got the whole thing at one time. So if they built a city and a tower, what evidence do we have of its existence? So this is where the Jewish historian Josephus comes in. He talks about Nimrod here. Now it was Nimrod who had cited them to such an affront and contempt for God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man and of great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God, as if it were through his means that they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured their happiness. He also gradually changed the government into one of tyranny. seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God but to bring them into a constant dependence on his power. If you close your eyes and you think real hard about the current environment we're in, this is really scary stuff, okay? Now, he also said he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again, for that he would build a tower too high for the waters to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. Now the multitude were very ready to follow the determination of Nimrod, and to esteem it a piece of cowardice to submit to God, and they built a tower, neither sparing any pains nor being in any degree negligent about the work, and by reason of the multitude of hands employed in it, it grew very high sooner than anyone could expect. But the thickness of it was so great, and it was so strongly built, that thereby its great height seemed upon the view to be less than it really was. It was built of burnt brick, cemented together with mortar, made of bitumen, that it might not be liable to admit water. When God saw that they acted so madly, he did not resolve to destroy them utterly, since they were not grown wiser by the destruction of the former sinners. I like that little point there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Obviously, they didn't get the point that everyone else died for this same thing, so we're not going to do that again. But he caused a tumult among them by production in them diverse languages, and causing that through the multitude of those languages they should not be able to understand one another. The place wherein they built the tower is now called Babylon, because of the confusion of that language which they readily understood before, for the Hebrews mean by the word Babel, confusion. I love this.
I love this because it's actually, you could take that and use it as commentary to explain the situation with Babylon in Revelation.
Yeah, exactly.
It's literally the exact same story again. Because, you know, what do the people, when God shuts down Babylon and ruins their economy and all that, what do the guys do? They sit on the bank and they wail and weep and moan for the great Babylon. It's everything, it's everything, it's everything, and now it's nothing. And they're going to be mad at God for it.
Yep. And I love how he points out the grace of the Lord and not just crushing them.
Yeah. Which is, again, is Revelation.
Yeah, exactly. So, now, the people sought to build a city and a tower. The Greek historian Herodotus talks about this. This is 484 to 425 BC. The outer wall is the main defense of the city. There is, however, a second inner wall of less thickness than the first, but very little inferior to it in strength. The center of each division of the town was occupied by a fortress. In the one stood the palace of the kings, surrounded by a wall of great strength and size. In the other was the sacred precinct of Jupiter Belus, a square enclosure 2 furlongs each way, with gates of solid brass, which has also remaining in my time. In the middle of the precinct there was a tower of solid masonry, a furlong in length and breadth, upon which was raised a second tower, and on that a third, and so on up to 8. The ascent to the top is on the outside by a path which winds round all the towers. When one is about halfway up, one finds a resting place and seats, where a person are wont to sit sometime on their way to the summit. And on the topmost tower there is a spacious temple, and inside the temple stands a couch of unusual size, richly adorned with a golden table by its side. There is no statue of any kind set up in the place, nor is the chamber occupied of knights by anyone but a single native woman, who, as the Chaldeans, the priests of this god, affirm, is chosen by himself, by the deity, out of all the women of the land. So this, obviously, is a really great description of Babylon. Babel as a city that is built, and then a tower that is built in the middle of it. Now, there's a lot of argument that the tower was of religious intent, and that all the ziggurats, which is what format this is, all the ziggurats that we see, were built kind of like that. They were a series of towers basically stacked together with the thing going up the outside. The Egyptians, the only difference is their ziggurats were not stepped on the outside. They were smooth. And they had all their climbing and stuff were on the inside. Okay. But what's interesting is the layout of a ziggurat is actually seen globally. Okay. There's evidence in India and China, all the pyramids in Mexico, in Central America and all that stuff. In South America.
North America built out of dirt.
Exactly.
Large
The dirt ones. So the Europeans built them out of dirt too. They built these giant mounds. And effectively, the concept there is that when the people were distributed, they took their knowledge of building this tower with them. That's why they're all the
And
same.
they just quit building it so tall.
Yeah.
What's the context as far as like when and what this was written? Like what was he referring to? I mean, you're saying this is him specifically talking about the Tower of Babel?
He's a
Or just
historian, much
Babylon?
like Josephus.
Okay.
In construct, so he's doing his historical construct here. That's what he's doing. He's not seeking to make an argument. He's kind of just laying out his understanding of the history.
How long is a furlong? Because we're talking a fairly good sized thing, and it's mentioned that it's at least 3 furlongs.
Yeah. So there's also a notion where it's referred to as a stadium, which a stadium is actually a technical size that I believe is, it's like 60.
Furlong is roughly 660 feet.
Yeah. So 600 feet was what I was thinking as the stadium size, is 600 by 600. Because there's another historian that refers to it that way.
So we're talking a huge structure.
It's big, yeah. And where Josephus was talking about its girth is so massive that its height didn't seem that great because it is
It's stacked,
huge.
massive,
The
giant.
bottom layer is
That's why I don't
massive.
seem so tall.
I wasn't going to say that. But you're right.
I'm deceptively tall.
So, we also have spoken about the persistence of flood-like events and traditions in other cultures around the globe and stuff. This is also very true of the Tower of Babel. For instance, this Aztec tradition, this giant saved from a flood who began building a great pyramid to reach the clouds. The project was destroyed by the gods, and the builder suddenly began speaking in different languages, resulting in utter confusion. Okay. Another story sourced from another ancient culture by a historian that I don't even know what that is. So it states that after mankind multiplied following a great flood, a tower was built to protect them in the event of another deluge. The languages of the builders, however, were confounded and the people were dispersed. An American tradition tells of giants who built a high tower which was blown down by the wrath of God. Within the winds were unknown words which were spread about to cause strife and contention. There's a Hindu tradition of a tall, proud tree that intended to reach heaven and gathering all mankind together under its shadow to prevent them from spreading out. Brahma, however, cuts apart the tree, and from its dispersed branches, different languages arise. And a Polynesian legend tells of Rata and the 3 sons surviving a great flood. After the flood, they attempt to build a tower to see the creator of God, Vatea or whatever. The god, however, chased the builders away, destroyed the tower, and caused them to speak in various tongues. And this one's pretty great. A legend from the Geko tribe in Burma, which is Myanmar, which says, in the days of Pandan Man, the people determined to build a pagoda that should reach up to heaven. When the pagoda was halfway up to heaven, God came down and confounded the language of the people so that they could not understand each other. The people scattered, and whatever that is, the father of the Geko tribe came west with 8 chiefs and settled in the valley of Saitang. So these people have a tradition that points specifically to an event exactly as described in the Tower of Babel.
Just like
Exactly
everybody has
we
a flood
talked about the flood story.
Yeah.
It's just now we have a context for what actually happened because the Lord told us what actually happened. Okay? Now, these here are some physical evidence, okay, of archaeological and present-day stuff. So, an ancient Babylonian baked clay tablet. This is called the Tower of Babel stele. That's this piece on top. The piece on the bottom there is just, it's highlighted the lines that are in that. So it depicts a step tower design like a ziggurat. It also has some basic layout descriptions. The man holding the staff there and everything, that's actually Nebuchadnezzar II. Okay. The inscription below the drawing of the tower reads, "The ziggurat or temple of the city of Babylon." Okay. And basically what happened is when he took over the region, he came upon the Tower of Babel and decided to rebuild it. Okay. I'm seeing conflicting information as to whether or not he did actually rebuild it or he only partially rebuilt it. But then later on, when the Persians took over and then Alexander the Great took over, Alexander said, "I'm going to rebuild the Tower of Babel," because he's Alexander. Yeah. And that's what Alexander does. He actually had his people take off the facade of the existing building that was there, and they destroyed the interior, and their goal was to use the original facade, rebuild the interior. Okay. However, as most people know about Alexander the Great, he died very young, and nothing he planned ever came to fruition after his death. Okay. So it did not get rebuilt. So what's interesting about that is there's also these things called the Burr's cylinders. Okay. Now these cylinders are kind of like books. They're written down like this. And they function like books in that they archive information. This one specifically says, "I am Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. My great Lord has established me in strength and has urged me to repair his buildings. The Tower of Babylon I have made and finished. The Tower of Borsippa had been built by a former king. He had completed 42 cubits maybe, but he did not finish its head. From the lapse of time, it had become ruined. The rain and wet had penetrated into the brickwork. The casing of burnt brick had bulged out. My great Lord inclined my heart to repair the building. I did not change its site, nor did I destroy its foundation platform. But in a fortunate month and upon an auspicious day, I undertook the rebuilding, and I set my hand to build it up and to finish its summit, as it had been in ancient times. So I built up its structure." This is evidence that probably Nebuchadnezzar did in fact rebuild the tower that he found. Now, what is there today? I'm actually missing a couple slides in here, which isn't here. This is a map of this region today. Okay, so Syria, Iraq, Iran, Armenia. Okay, you see the spot right there? That is a place called Timnaki, okay, which is believed to be the Tower of Babel. Get a little closer look here. You see Baghdad's right there. We talked about where Babel was, an orientation of Baghdad, and Hilla, where they took the bricks to make their houses. Okay, this is a satellite view of the region. This up here is the Babylon Palace that Josephus was talking about, and then this is actually the wall of Babylon here in this section. They have a tourist resort because it looks like a nice place.
Of course,
to visit.
yeah, it looks great. We should go.
And then you see this layout of a structure right here, and this is a zoom in of that. Okay, this is what they believe to have been the actual Tower of Babel on this site. Okay, the reason why it actually is not there is because we were told that Alexander the Great tore it down in order to rebuild it. He never got to rebuild it, thus it's not there. So there's this wonderful foundation for a giant building here, and it's actually started collecting water, and it's kind of this pool of water now around it. So that is pretty significant evidence that the Tower of Babel is 100% genuinely a real thing.
Beautiful.
I did, but it went away. So that's good.
You were talking about how they used the bricks afterwards. The people came and took them, and
Mm-hmm.
where was that? How far was that from where?
The Hillel place.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's right there. Yeah,
it's like right on top of it.
It
Have they
looks like it's
studied
probably
any of that, as far as comparatively goes.
So they did find that several of the bricks in the area had Nimrod's stamp on them.
Really?
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
They did find some bricks that were lacquered blue, which they think were actually from the very top of the tower, which would have been, kind of where that big couch was that he was talking about, the golden table.
Sort of a palace top.
Yeah, the palace top up there where you actually put the, where you get the impression at some point the notion was that God would descend to that place, and that's where they would meet, whatever. That's also, they did, I found other evidence that they did in fact clear out the place every single night. There was never more than one person in the tower at night, and that was, from everything I can tell, a woman that was left in the top of the tower in case their god decided that he needed a female. Interesting plan. But there is some interesting stuff, because Nimrod, he becomes kind of this mythological being of concept, and we can talk about kind of the grandizing of people from this time period, and how they became kind of like mythological figures and stuff. But there's some writings that say that the woman in the top of the tower was his mother. So,
How far removed, timeline-wise, was Nimrod from Nebuchadnezzar? Like when Nimrod got driven off.
oh, there's a long, it's a long time before Nebuchadnezzar comes back, because that's in the bulk of the Babylon era,
Right.
and
Several
Israel's
hundred
established.
years,
It's
I don't remember what timeline was.
many hundred years, yeah. So I will pull that up for you next time. Okay. That's all I have for this time. Yes, ma'am.
I have this question. It might be really silly or whatever, but okay, I just don't understand like why they stopped building just because God messed up all their languages.
What?
Because I mean, we can kind of communicate with people that don't speak the same languages, and they had been building for months and months and months, and so I just feel like they should know.
If they didn't finish the tower, because he does speak about the tower in past tense.
It kind of sounds like they finished
At
it.
one point, it sounds like they finished it.
Okay.
In the text, in the biblical text, it sounds like they finished it.
Verse 5 says he came down to see the city and the tower.
And the tower.
Which the children of man had built.
Yeah. So when he says had built, that gives me the inclination that they finished it. Now, there is some argument that they didn't actually finish the very top of it. So that they had, and you can make that argument in language that they said they had built this, they had made progress, they just had not completed it. They got to they just didn't finish the very top of it. But the notion there, this is the way I would think about it. If you've ever done a project with, say, 100 people, okay, on a job site, and they all have to read the blueprints and all this stuff. If you all of a sudden, everybody on the job site is speaking a different language, you're not talking about 2 languages. You're talking about maybe 50 languages. Okay? All of a sudden, nobody can talk to anybody. And nobody has any idea what's going on. And if you've ever been in an environment where you have 100 people trying to accomplish something, when they can't communicate, they all have a different notion of how it should be done. And I'm pretty sure that people started throwing bricks at each other pretty quick.
33-pound bricks?
33-pound bricks.
The other thing to
Black
think
or
about
blue.
is we also have grown up, and if you use today's example, we've grown up with people who can't communicate. They didn't. They all communicated it, and then instantly they couldn't communicate.
We have an understanding of Spanish. Like, we know there's another language out there. All of a sudden,
What
they're
is going
sitting there,
on?
like he
It's
said,
a freak.
nobody can talk to anybody. And they don't even know what to call this reason why they can't talk to each other anymore. So it's not and plus, remember too, God said he dispersed them. Okay? So God
Well,
goes,
it was a
"Phoom."
terrifying event.
Yeah.
Technically, it may have been hard to finish whatever didn't get done. But just emotionally, like whether anybody was willing to admit it or not, like they knew God, the finger of God had just reached down into their midst and said, stop.
Yeah.
And that's a good time to walk away.
Yeah. And Nimrod had wound them up and got them going. And then God did his thing, and they basically have to ascribe that to God.
Because Nimrod couldn't stop him.
Exactly. Nimrod couldn't communicate with him anymore either.
Well, yeah, but he couldn't stop God. His whole thing was, I'm going to build this
I'm as
tower
big as that.
to counteract God's power on earth.
If he tries to flood again, hey, we'll just climb up at the top of the building.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah.
be fine.
And the truth is, he can't even keep God from giving people different languages.
If he even understood what that was, to your point.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'd been a very confusing time. It would be like if you woke up tomorrow and started speaking Russian. Frankly, you would freak out yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because you're hearing yourself and you no longer understand what's happening. So this is where my question is, did he also change the language they speak in their head? Okay. He almost had to, because that would drive you insane. So, because if you spoke English in your head,
All of a sudden understood each other.
Yeah.
But they didn't understand this other group.
the other group over
This
there.
other group of people
It's
only
really
understood
fantastic.
that group of people.
Yeah.
Which is why I mentioned the stroke earlier or something, God had to affect people's brains.
Yeah, but he doesn't have to have a mechanical.
He can just rewrite it.
Yeah, he can just speak it and it happens.
Yeah. He doesn't have to have a disease condition or something like that would portray that. He can
But-
just say, you're done.
For the ones who, if we're dealing with apologetics, for the ones who don't understand what God's capable of, they want to know a scientific way.
Well, like I said, it's pretty easy to say there is no scientific way. Without God, this doesn't happen.
Yes.
That's pretty easy to say. Because if you had 150,000 people that had a stroke at one time,
That's still God.
hey, that's God.
But I mean, God
but
made the language center of your brain, which is what allows you to learn language
Exactly.
at all. So if he wants to just flip a switch,
yeah, and we'll talk about the language stuff and stuff. when
Speaking
it's
of flipping a switch.
yeah, we're flipping the switch now because I'm running over.
remember what
So.
the language center thing?
Anyways, pray it up.
Lord, thank you so much for tonight and this great discussion. Just looking into what you have done and realizing again just how great a God you are and how big you are and that there's nothing you can't do and that you confound the wise. Lord, you confound those who are full of pride and claim to have authority over their own life. And sometimes you do it so drastically and yet at the same time so gently. This was as soft a drastic rebuke as there could be. And that is a mark of a God who has nothing to prove. And so we are thankful tonight to serve you. We are thankful tonight to have confidence in you and in the Scripture that we're reading from. We're thankful for the evidence. Lord, there is a foundation of a building described in Scripture there. And everybody has to see that, and everybody has to acknowledge that. It makes no sense otherwise than that it lines up with this Scripture. The fact that other cultures around the world have the same kind of story, but they don't have this foundation of the building. Lord, that shows us that this is the source. And we thank you for the evidence. We don't need it, Lord. We believe you by faith. But I'm still thankful for the evidence. It gives us a point to use in discussions with people who are scoffers. And it helps increase our confidence to know that there's just no argument out there against you that stands. There is plain, true, seeable, testable evidence for everything that we need to know. And so thank you for that, Lord. Thank you for being so gracious and kind. Thank you for this time together. We love you and we praise you. In Jesus' name. God's people said,
Amen.
Amen. If you have the link, please join us immediately for the prayer meeting. If not, we will see you Sunday. But until then,
Love God, love everybody else.
all right. Taking prayer requests now. No comment.